Okay. So again, you know, I can remember when I was a physio student, and the two things we had to have was a copy of Grey's Anatomy that was 2 weeks' pay for me, and a box of bones, half a box of bones. I don't think I ever really looked at them. And the sorted selection, didn't you have to draw? I wasn't very good at osteology. It was Friday morning at uni and I missed a lot. And I think it was because it wasn't articulated. It didn't have a lot of meaning for me because they were all just these separate bones. Then I think I sold them for money at the end of first year. So, Grey's Anatomy, I still have, and I still consult often. Okay, but what I was meaning to say is just, I know we've talked about this before, but there are wonderful resources out there for anatomy now. Absolutely wonderful things that you can get, all the 3D dimensional models, and the are just wonderful. So they always say you don't need to know anatomy as a Feldenkrais practitioner. Don't believe them. You don't need the names, but you do need to know what happens at the joints. And that's what you're exploring in yourself in your ATM. Because I think one question that I think someone said to me, I can't remember, and I mean it gets asked a lot in training programs. You know, how do you know you're not going to hurt someone? You know? I think the biggest thing is knowing what happens at the joints and what's available at the joints, that you're not going to try and make a joint do something that it's actually not designed to do. To put your hands on them? You mean, or to...
ATM, like if the person has a neck fusion, you know, I'm very wary.
And what I would say, Martina, is pay attention to that. You know, if you're trying to learn, if Martina's trying to learn, they are not the people that you need to be learning on. Because what they will do is inhibit your learning, because you're going to have expectations and ideas of what you should be able to do or what might happen to them that really, I promise you, will really get in the way of your learning. And it's really important for all of you really to work within your comfort. That's what so much of this work is about.
It's like on our website, you know, some people seem to have no worries working pretty strong with people, and pretty much a lot. I'm really wary of it.
Really trust that. Really trust it.
Even I've got to, you know, massage experience and the OT, but
doesn't matter. Trust that. Trust that feeling.
Because I have experienced some negative outcomes with some FRs, and even with, I've overdone it with ATMs. So I think what's happening with people who've got seriously something wrong.
Yeah, so trust it, really trust it. You know, I can remember, and it, you know, it was really interesting because when we trained, there was no one else to send people to, really. There weren't any other Feldenkrais practitioners. So I think we sort of bumbled along a bit. But I think if that happens, and you know, there are many people that you can refer them on to. But I would really encourage you with that stronger feeling, and to remember also that it's a powerful learning tool, that experience that you've had, because, you know, you could also know then what would you say, what could you do that would help someone in that situation, because you've been through it yourself of knowing when you push too hard or do too much. And it's not that you're doing it deliberately, you don't even know that you're doing it. And that's many of our clients. I've never met anyone who deliberately sets out to hurt themselves. Never. Okay, so let's continue on with this anatomy. So again, so what we've been doing is we found the movement of the shoulder girdle and connected whatever was easy for the person in with how we lifted their arm to find lightness. So we've got the shoulder. You were really exploring the shoulder a lot in that ATM, hey? All of this rotation that the shoulder can do around its long axis. That it can go right up above the head, out to the side. And if you do this yourself on the skeleton, you'll see how much this has to keep turning. So even though we talk about them as straight planes of movement, that humeral head is constantly turning in its socket, constantly, because it has to do that to stay in its socket. If it moved in straight lines, it'd be outside its socket. So it's really nice, you know, just to come here and look what that humeral head has to do to move up. It's beautiful what it can do. Yeah, it's constantly turning, constantly changing its shape.
Is it rotating or is it just moving?
Come and have a look. Come and have a look. Huh? So as I move it up, so his shoulder blade wants to go back a little bit, but look at this movement in here, Amanda. You see what it's doing? Constantly. Huh? Huh? If I go out to the side, it's got to be constantly changing. No? Because it has to keep in contact with that much smaller movement there. So it has to constantly be moving around. So, and that's, as I said, that's the little bit about planes of movement, because we get this idea that it's sort of a straight line, but no joint is ever in a straight line. No? Never moving in a straight line. It's always adapting. So that's the shoulder, constantly moving. Elbow, can you, and don't you love it, you know, you go from one end, which is called a ball and socket joint. This is really round at this end. We go to a hinge joint at the other end. Isn't it unbelievable how the shape of the bone changes? That instead of this round bone, all of a sudden we flatten out and become much more a flat bone, because that's the movement of the elbow. A hinge joint, and you can see this going. Can you feel that point of your elbow? And can you feel how that slides in that socket of the humerus? It's only got one direction. It's only got one direction. Until that comes in. It's only got one direction. It's an absolute hinge joint. And within that, it's not a straight line. If you come and again look at the shapes of the joint, and that's why you'll see many people, you know, as you straighten, generally this gets wider. It's not usually a perfect straight line. That the forearm will get wider than the arm.
When you say direction, is plane of action?
That's flexion extension. Yeah, that's the plane of action. But as I said, if you look at the joints, it's always curving. No? It's beautiful. So where does the round motion come from? Okay, here's the ulna, the long And this, I just love the full wrap. Okay, so the ulnar, and we can see him a bit. So your ulnar is the big bone at the elbow and articulates into the elbow. At the wrist, they've swapped their roles. The radius is now the big bone at the wrist, and the ulnar's just the little buddy. They both stick out, one each side, but the radius is thumb.
Thank you. And the other one is the other.
Yeah, an ulnar is to the little finger. So again, you know, and as I said, sometimes I wonder about these skeletons, the shape of their bones, but anyway. But absolutely, this is always, so the radius, that's the rotate. He doesn't do it very well, but that rotates around. Yeah? So how you get the most movement from the radius, because it goes down to the thumb, so the radius goes down to the thumb. So if the thumb rotates you around, so leave the little finger more where it is and you more rotate the thumb around the little finger, that will be mainly radius movement. If you can imagine. So if I hold the little finger and the ulnar, then I'm going to get movement mainly up there in the radius. If I rotate around my little finger, how's the movement going to change? Can you feel the difference? Can you feel those two bones do something different? No? So if I rotate around my middle finger, what happens? If I'm going in a line directly down through both of those bones. They both rotate. Yeah? They rotate much more around each other. Oh, can people feel that? No? This has an absolutely huge impact on how we use our arms. So if I tended to bring my shoulders forward a little bit, which we were looking at yesterday, which often means our chest goes down a little bit, which finger would it be easier to rotate around? The thumb? The thumb. No? Can you see how that's going to sort of take you into the thumb being the main rotator? No? So if I lift my chest and my shoulder blades, my shoulder girdle gets wider and tends to go back, which finger am I going to more likely rotate around? The little finger.
That's why I can't find the idea of actually rotating around. That one's like...
Yeah, absolutely. Not in your image. No? What we want is that we can rotate around any finger. But people have really strong biases around what they do. So, you know, I've always got to tell my little story that I love about the young boy who came to see me because he was having so much trouble with his hamstrings playing football. The thing that made all the difference was when he held the ball, and he held the football, he held it with his thumbs. So what did that predetermine was going to happen in his shoulder girdles and in his chest, down. Everything's flexing a little bit. Yeah, the hammies are really working hard to hold him up, which is totally different to if he can learn to hold the ball with his middle finger. And it's the same, you know, whenever you get people coming in with, what's it called? Tennis elbow. It's the same thing though. What you'll see it over and over again. They've got a real bias to how they orient, which finger they're orienting to through their hand, through their, that they just keep going through the same way. What would it feel? Well, which one? Here's tennis elbow here. So is it the ulnar? It's the radius. Huh? Whereas golfer's elbow is the...
Oh, the golfer's elbow is the ulnar, and the other one, your radius is your right. Okay.
So, you know, who was I talking? Oh, I know. And they were talking about they're having trouble with golf because their coach told them that they've got to curl their little finger around the... But then they were orienting everything around their little finger, rather than still feeling they had a whole hand that could adapt. And this is coming back to you a little bit, Anastasia, but it's not always true. But you will often find people, and again, I don't want to get into too much of this, but you know, people with nerve pain often have really strong patterns about which part of their hand they use. Yeah, and you'll see it, you know, the people who get into here with their thumbs, you know, what's that going to do with their, or are they just a middle finger or the mouse, the orientation, you're going to use the mouse. Yeah? And just realising, so that periphery can have a huge organisation, put constraints.
Had surgery on her from working at Nando's and chickens. And she had to have surgery
and I can guarantee she wouldn't have had many options about how she was being able to flip. It would have just been the same, action all the time. And it's exactly the same if you follow down through the foot and the leg, how people do that. So you've got, can you feel on yourselves at the moment which part of these bones are easy to feel and which aren't as easy to feel? So where's it easy to feel these bones? Usually the ulnar at the back you can track all the way down.
Rotate the ulnar as well.
You can. Most of the rotation of the ulnar happens up this end. There is a little bit. Can you feel it as you do it?
So even though it's a hinge joint.
And that's because of these beautiful curved surfaces. So that there is movement.
Would never have thought that that's possible because it's like a hinge joint with one plane of movement.
And that's why you've really got to get this idea that they're always curving and there's bits of give in there. So that's the radius and the ulnar. So then we get into the wrist. So again, as I said, in the elbow, the ulnar is the main bone. Radius does have a role to play as well, but it's mainly rotation. It's the opposite. One of the things that I really loved about the wrist that I never knew until recently, and it has transformed the way I work with people's hands, is I never realised that in these little tiny carpal bones, no muscles attach to the first layer of carpal bones. These ones. The ones closest. They all go to the second layer of carpal bones. No. I was a bit shocked, really? To muscle. They can glide, they do lots of little movements. So what's really important about the wrist is, and it's the same with any joint, it's proximal, distal again, is that you really have to get the idea that if the carpal bones are moving forward, there's a natural inclination for them to get a little bit smaller at the front. Can you see that there? No? Front of the palm? Yeah. So they would come together a little bit there. But if they are coming together at exactly the same time, these two bones need to be moving backwards. So as your wrist is flexing, feel the difference if you hold these two bones really still and flex your wrist. And then feel the difference if you let those two bones slide back a little bit as the wrist comes forward. And you'll feel as the wrist comes forward, just as I said, the shape of these are going to, you'll feel as you come forward, the fingers tend to come closer to each other. And as you go back, the opposite happens and the fingers will tend to get wide. And you'll open at the front of the carpal bones. But it's again really getting this idea, and I think it was that image for me about where the muscles are pulling that made me realise how much that had to glide through there to let the movement be easy. Again, so again, it's going to make a difference which one I want to rotate around, but you've got all these little movements in here. So if I wanted to make a palm, and you can see this is from the creases on our hands, what does it go through? How does that organise itself? Just if you're thinking of taking your thumb to your little finger, look at the shape the bones make in your palm, and you can see it if you follow this through from these bones, just the way they're shaped in here. And as I said, just get here and play with the skeleton. You'll see that there tends to be a diagonal that goes through because of the shape of these bones here. So if I want to get them together, it's always going to be my thumb because of the nature of the joint of the thumb that rotates further. And that's a lot to do with how these two bones are coming into the wrist joint. Because in these two bones, that's where I'm going to get the movement to let that curve forward. So it can't curve forward in the middle, around the middle finger, because that's not where these two bones are sitting. So it has to be off to the side where the radius and ulna are attaching to each other. So that, you know, and that's where it gets really interesting. If you can begin to feel this, you get more of an idea when you're playing around with someone's bones, what you're looking for. What is it that you want to happen in there? Where are the directions that are going to happen? Anything else specifically about the hand? Ah, yeah. So if you're going to make no, I'll go back a bit. These movements you were doing here this morning. Huh? That's an incredibly clever lesson to break down. But basically, most of you probably know that you have muscles in the forearm, and this is the same in the leg. These long tendons going down to the fingers, and the long ones coming down in the front of your hand come from up here. And what they do is, if they're working on, they bend the fingers. But they will also bend the wrist as well. So they're working a long way away. So I just wanted to say, what if you're feeling anxious about something generally, or struggling with something, where do your fingers go? They flex. No? They always flex. Very rarely will you see someone going, I'm really stressed. Startle they will, but startle's different. That's startle. And then they'll come back into flexion after startle. Yeah? So that is why this is such a clever lesson, because as soon as you struggle, what you want to do is pull your fingers in, and then you can't get your elbow through. Huh? So you've got to so strongly inhibit the fingers pulling in to be able to get that movement to go through. Okay, so let's add in that you're now going to explore. So we've started with the elbow a little bit when we got decided which way to go. So now you're going to get their hand to here, begin to explore the movements of their forearm, their wrist, their carpus, and their fingers. Okay? Off you go. Same partner. Same arm. Still the person who was lying is lying, because we've sort of set them up. So you're doing it on the same arm. It's just amazing when you look at it.
I always knew the easy form because we do loads with that.
Yeah.